In early January 2026, police in Pennsylvania made a discovery that authorities described as something out of a horror film. Officers responding to reports of repeated grave robberies at Mount Moriah Cemetery, which is an historical burial ground near Philadelphia, observed a man leaving the grounds with a sack and what appeared to be human remains, all in plain sight. That man was Jonathan Christ Gerlach, aged 34. Yes, apparently his middle name is Christ. Apparently he also is a singer in a metal band. Well, inside his vehicle, officers saw skulls, bones, and mummified remains. And when they searched his home and a separate storage locker, they found more than 100 human skeletons and skeletal parts. Some remains were placed on shelves, some were hanging from the ceiling, some were still even in a state of decomposition. Delaware County District Attorney Tanner Rouse later described the scene as akin to a horror movie come to life. Further investigation suggested that Gerlach was allegedly selling body parts to collectors of oddities. And while this is a shocking case, it's not a new phenomenon. Grave robbing for profit goes back centuries. For example, to the days of Burke and Hare selling corpses to medical professionals for scientific study. The fact that they sometimes made living people corpses to sell for a scientific study, that's a whole other story. We'll do that another time. But as far as we know, Gerlach wasn't doing that. He was stealing bodies that were already dead. Now, the hobby of collecting human remains by people other than Ed Gein also goes back to Victorian times and further. There are cases of shoes, wallets, and books being made by figures of law enforcement from human leather from the criminals that they had apprehended. I guess they were a kind of prize, if you will. It was a different time. But let's take a look at some recent cases of corpse tampering and what it means in the way of morality and ethics. Welcome back, everybody, to 5 Seconds to Sundown. My name is Gemma. I'm your host, and if you're new here, this is where I talk about crime and justice, dark history, and the occasional ghost story. Thank you so much for joining me. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments which cases you'd like me to look into next. Today, as always, I will include a trigger warning. This episode contains discussion of death and the handling of human remains. So let's get back to the case of alleged grave robber Jonathan Gerlach. After making the horrific discovery within his car, storage facility, and his home, the police case alleged that Gerlach had been breaking into mausoleums and burial vaults at Mount Moriah Cemetery since around early November 2025. And apparently he targeted up to about 26 mausoleums, according to authorities. Mount Moriah Cemetery is a sprawling site with tens of thousands of graves, dating back to the 18th and 19th centuries, and it even includes veterans of American wars from those eras, making this case not only an issue of criminal theft, but also historical desecration. This cemetery was apparently in a state of abandonment. For example, there was no groundskeeper, but there are apparently some volunteers who try to keep it in some state of order. Obviously, with no or very little funding, there's only so much you can do. Some of the human remains reportedly included skeletal items with identifying objects such as jewellery or clothing that may help trace them back to individuals and families. On January 6, 2026, surveillance teams spotted Jonathan Gerlach leaving the cemetery carrying a crowbar and burlap bag. He was taken into custody and allegedly admitted to stealing at least 30 sets of human remains from the cemetery. I mean, if they found more than 100 at his house, obviously he's been doing this for a little bit longer. Anyway, subsequent searches uncovered in Gerlach's possession over 100 human skulls, ashes, and skeletal fragments, including long bones, which I presume refers to femurs, maybe arm bones, I don't know. He also had mummified hands and feet. And this is wild. He had 2 decomposing human torsos, one of which was hanging in his basement and was viewed by a friend who was visiting the house. This raises questions to me. Investigators are asking, why were there torsos? Was he cutting the bodies up? Who were they? When were they buried? If they are still decaying, are they in fact historical corpses? What was he doing with the rest of the bodies? In any case, Gerlach was charged with hundreds of criminal counts, including abuse of a corpse, burglary, theft, trespassing, desecration of public monuments and historical burial places, criminal mischief, and receiving stolen property. So the list of charges is pretty lengthy. He remains in custody on $1 million bail, with a preliminary court hearing scheduled. It might already have happened, I need to check. But what makes this case particularly disturbing to investigators is not just the theft itself, but the possible purpose behind amassing human remains. Court documents say Gerlach was active in online spaces dedicated to skeleton collecting and human bone sales, including an alleged Facebook group called Human Bones and Skull Selling Group. Detectives observed that his social media accounts followed taxidermy and oddity sites, accounts selling human remains, pages referencing bone museums, suggesting a link to a niche marketplace where human bones are collected and traded. Now, full disclosure, I follow taxidermists and oddities pages. I like that stuff. I'm into that stuff. I'm a spooky bitch. This is nothing new. But I'm not sure I've come across many accounts blatantly selling human remains, even if they say that they are ethically sourced. I have heard of people acting as sort of caretakers of bones or body parts that were previously used for medical research. And that leads us down a whole other rabbit hole of ethics in medical research. We'll come back to that later. Once, many years ago when I was at the Paris catacombs, the lady that was working there, I saw when we came back up to the office after we had toured the catacombs, there was a collection of skulls and bones on the desk. And I said, why are these up here? Why aren't they down there? And she said, people just steal the bones all the time. We find them in their backpacks. But back to Jonathan Gerlach. In one Instagram post under an account linked to Gerlach, skulls were pictured with a caption hinting at availability for inquiry, raising questions about whether the remains in his possession were being offered for sale. In states like Pennsylvania, the possession or sale of human bones is not always unlawful, provided they are not from a modern grave and are legally obtained. But what is illegal is stealing remains from cemeteries, desecrating burial places, and trafficking goods known to be stolen property. Gerlach's alleged involvement in breaking into mausoleums and removing remains, paired with his online footprint, suggests both a criminal pattern along with a moral dilemma. Can dead humans be something to possess? And if not, what should the punishment be for profit from such items? Then there are wider questions of museums owning shrunken heads and mummified pharaohs. Does the heading of research or education fix the issue? Where does it end? This is obviously a question that will allow for varying opinions, I think. Please chat in the comments section if you feel strongly either way. Beyond the disturbing discovery at the home of Jonathan Gerlach, there is the underlying human grief beneath this case. Many of the remains allegedly stolen date back decades, some centuries, but their families may still exist generations down the line. Because Gerlach didn't tag the remains with their names and dates of death, which would have been helpful, Delaware County officials have made efforts to identify remains and contact families, but this work is very slow and complicated. District Attorney Rouse said investigators are trying to piece together who these people were and hopefully put them back in their resting place. It reminds me of a case that came out last year, actually, which was near me in Melbourne, Australia. And this is a weird one. In fact, it's one of the most unserious cases of body trafficking I think I've ever seen. It could only have happened here. Anyway, in early 2025, Joanna Kinman, aged 48, pleaded guilty to one count of offensive conduct involving human remains. She admitted that she had been planning to sell 2 human toes stored in a jar of formaldehyde. And how much did 2 toes in a jar go for online? Well, apparently she was hoping to get $400 for that on the social media groups that she was part of, like one named Bone Buddies Australia, which I might join later. She also had in her possession a pig trotter, alligator claw, bird skull, and baby teeth belonging to her children. I mean, whatever you're into. I guess the teeth from the kids were ethically sourced. Anyway, was Joanna a grave robber like Jonathan Gerlach? Was Joanna a grave robber like Jonathan Gerlach? Did she dig up a corpse and cut its toes off? And if so, why? Well, she didn't. Spoiler. But listen to this. Joanna worked at an animal shelter. After a local man died, his dogs were sent to this shelter to be rehomed. I think it was one of those situations where a person dies, they aren't found for a little while, and someone does a welfare check. And why do I think this? Well, because no one who went in to collect the body bothered to tell the animal shelter that the dead man was missing part of his feet. And this is interesting to me because you'd think that they would notice something like this. But if they did, they didn't say anything. And we know this because of what happened next. At the shelter, one or both or all of the dogs threw up the man's toes. And while the toes were thrown in the bin by a sickened colleague who then had to go home early, such was her distress, Joanna took the toes out of the bin and decided to sell them online. She was quoted as saying to police, "It was a toe." And I thought, cool, it's a toe. I mean, she's being honest, it's a toe. It was a course of action that her lawyer, Raina Martini, a fabulous name, described as reprehensible and insensitive. In Joanna's defence, may I take the stand? My question is, shouldn't the team who picked up the body and cleaned the scene be accountable for not disclosing that the man was missing his toes and that it was clearly not from a previous surgical procedure? Was there not a registered doctor who pronounced the man dead? And if so, why didn't he or she notice that the toes were missing and put two and two together that they may have been made into dog treats? Furthermore, if the body of their owner wasn't missing his toes, where in the hell did the toes come from? The Daily Mail wrote, quote, "The accused is an avid contributor to the site and has sold multiple items, including a wet specimen of a stillborn kitten, a wet specimen of a stillborn puppy, and a book titled History of Punishment and Torture," the prosecutor said. Joanna's lawyer, Mr. Martini, argued that her name had been thrown around in the media and that she had been caused enough stress without being punished further. But Magistrate Andrew Sim was not happy and slammed Joanna's behaviour. He said something I'm sure he thought he would never say in his life. Quote, "It's just astounding that she would not have understood that taking two toes that have been vomited up by one or two dogs from a deceased person and then effectively trying to sell those on the internet would not be the wrong thing to do." Well, Joanna was sentenced to an 18-month community corrections order, and that was that. Moving on. The Gerlach and Kinman cases aren't just about selling items of questionable moral provenance. They raise questions about violating the dignity of the dead. Who's to judge where those boundaries lay? Let's turn our attention to another case of body part trafficking. Because while Jonathan's case involves illegal desecration and Joanna's case offensive misconduct, the next case shows how the dead can be exploited legally without consent by large companies, which will of course surprise no one. And for this, there are no charges laid and no justice given. This is a very little known story that wasn't in the news a whole lot, at least not in the English language news. So I don't have a huge amount of information. In 2022, a young woman named Orimar Iturriago Villegas from Venezuela crossed the US border searching for safety and stability. She travelled over 2 months and thousands of miles to get to the US. The terrain she travelled included jungle and desert. This was not an easy journey. On arrival in Texas, she contacted her mum to let her know that she had arrived safely. And as far as I've read, she entered the US legally. She was detained while she was processed and released. But within 2 months of her arrival in Texas, Orimar was murdered. And as tragic as this turn of events was, it was not the end of her story. No one could have imagined what would become of her next, because it was there that, without her family's knowledge, her body was stolen, dissected, and sold. Orimar Uturiago Villegas was 21 years old, and as a Venezuelan, like many migrants, she believed there might be opportunity waiting across the border in the United States. More importantly, she was hoping there would be the chance of safety too. As we've learned lately, the situation in Venezuela has not been great, and I'm sure that Orimar was not the only citizen looking to get out of there. According to hiplatina.com, quote, "Over the past decade, there has been a sharp increase in the amount of Venezuelan migrants coming to the US due to the ongoing socio-economic and political crises in the South American country. According to the Migration Policy Institute, the number of Venezuelan immigrants in the United States has almost tripled since 2010, and more than 7 million Venezuelans have fled their country since 2015 due to the authoritarian regime and economic turbulence." According to her family, Orimar was hoping to get a job and send money home, and eventually she wanted to help bring her relatives to safety as well. She also wanted to help her mum build a new house. As I said before, Orimar was killed in North Texas during a road rage incident. The Daily Mail said that she was riding in the back of a vehicle in a suburb of Dallas with two acquaintances on October 29, 2022. When 25-year-old Shardrell Webb fired a gun into the rear of the car. Orimar was tragically shot in the head. Police determined that her death was a homicide, and the man responsible was later charged and prosecuted. And although Orimar's death was violent, sudden, and senseless, it would not be the final injustice that she suffered. After her death, Orimar's body was taken into the custody of local authorities, as is standard practice. What happened next is where this story takes a deeply disturbing turn. Even though Orimar's family was actively searching for her in order to give her a proper burial, Texas authorities classified her body as unclaimed. And under Texas law, if a body is deemed unclaimed, meaning no next of kin has been identified or located within a specific time frame, counties are permitted to transfer the remains elsewhere. Now, whether they listed her as such because of a clerical error or systemic neglect, maybe they knew that she was an immigrant, and since her family was in another country, spoke another language, they just decided to put it in the too hard basket, as we say in Australia. What we do know is that Orimar's mother, Arelis Coromoto Villegas, was alive, reachable, and actively trying to locate her daughter's remains, but no one contacted her. I want to point out something that's not clear within this story, and that's how Orimar's family were informed of her murder or the location of her body. So listen to this. hiplatina.com wrote, quote, "After traversing Central America, she crossed the Rio Grande into Texas in September and turned herself into border authorities. Her mother told NBC that Orimar was released from a detention center and went to stay with an acquaintance near Dallas, a former neighbor from Venezuela named Alexis Moreno. On the evening of 28th of October 2022, Orimar got in the car with some friends in Dallas and was shot in the head in a road rage incident. When police and paramedics found Orimar's body, she was taken to the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office, where the search for her next of kin would commence according to protocol. Did it though? The next morning, Orimar's family learned of her death not from authorities, but from a neighbor in Venezuela who knew Alexis Moreno. While it is not clear what exactly transpired after Orimar's death, her younger sister, Oribel Acero Villegas, said she spoke briefly with a person whom she believed worked at the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office, and they asked for permission from Moreno to act as the family's primary point of contact, which she agreed to do. However, Orimar's case file features no mention of any call, with an entry instead stating that a county official reportedly met with Moreno in person and spoke with her mother Arelis through the phone. Without her family's knowledge or consent, county authorities donated Orimar's body to a local medical school, where she was cut up and assigned different dollar values, buried or cremated, all whilst her mother and family remained unaware, desperately seeking to have her body repatriated and returned to Venezuela. And Orimar was not the only person sold off to the University of North Texas Health Science Center, which operated a program that accepted unclaimed bodies from counties for use in medical research and training. She was one of thousands of people whose unclaimed bodies were taken there. And on paper, this is legal. On paper, it seems okay. If no one claims a body, it's the property of the state, right? We presume they'd be given a simple burial, I would guess. But in Orimar's case, her body was dissected. Her remains were separated into parts. Some were used for medical instruction and some were sold or leased. According to the reporting, the institution assigned the cost of $703 for her legs and $900 for her torso. Body parts are sold to medical schools, research institutions, and private companies developing surgical tools and testing devices. All of this occurred without the consent of Orimar's family. Her mother had no idea what had happened to Orimar's body until 2 years after the murder. Now, as someone who's donated their body to science, I'm okay with the practice of dissecting bodies in the name of research. But that was my decision, and it was one that I made over the course of years and years. I actively gave my permission to a university to use my body after my death for scientific research, or in my case, specifically forensic research in connection to crimes and education of detectives in training. That was my decision. She didn't get that choice, and that's a huge problem for me. If you know me, you know that death plans are super important to me. And respecting death plans are really important as well. But Orimar's mother discovered her daughter's name on a public list of unclaimed bodies. And by the time she got through to authorities, she found out that Orimar's body was gone. It had been dissected and distributed and was now completely irretrievable. Her mother later said she felt as though her daughter had been killed twice. Once by violence and once by the system. Legally, many of the steps taken after Orimar's death may fall within the parameters of the law. But obviously the case raises profound questions. Who decides when a body is unclaimed? And how long should authorities wait before making that determination? And here's another problem for me. Why are migrants, the poor, and the undocumented disproportionately affected? Because investigations found that thousands of bodies used in similar programs came from people who were homeless, mentally ill, migrants, or those that were estranged from family due to poverty or displacement, those with no fixed address. In the world of true crime, we call these people the less dead. People that travel, are disconnected from family. These are easy targets for criminals and apparently big businesses as well. Orimar fit a profile that made her vulnerable to social injustice, even after her death. And Orimar's case was not isolated. Journalists actually uncovered that multiple Texas counties allegedly had long-standing agreements with medical institutions to offload unclaimed bodies, saving money on burials while supplying anatomy programs and making money. How convenient. And like in Orimar's case, families often weren't notified. Therefore, consent was assumed by absence. Because you can't give your consent if you don't know you're required to give it, right? And once a body was entered into the research system, there was no going back. After the story became public, there was widespread backlash. Advocates demanded better notification procedures, extended timelines before bodies are deemed unclaimed, better transparency in medical body programs, and most importantly, explicit consent requirements. But for Orimar's family, reform came too late. Her body can never be returned. Orimar Iturriaga Villegas came to the United States seeking a better life. Instead, she became an example of how bureaucracy can strip a person of their dignity even after death. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. Firstly, that legality does not equal morality. I mean, we all know that. And just because a hospital is doing it doesn't mean it's okay. Secondly, death does not protect people from exploitation. Orimar was treated as a specimen and was sold as such, but given the option, her family would have taken her body back. So overall, this is an issue that I think some people may see as more serious than others. Some may say they're dead. What's the big deal? We just go back to the earth anyway. And while that may be true, it's also about respecting people's death plans. As I said earlier, I've donated my body to a university, and it is my dying wish for my remains to be used for forensic education, specifically in education for detectives, medical examiners, and pathologists, which is what this particular university specialises in. I want to be part of the process of solving crime. If my body can help solve one crime, that's my legacy. And I haven't really decided what I want done with my bones afterwards. I guess I'd like to be buried with my husband, but honestly, if my skull ended up on the black market, would it mean that much if my body's already been used for forensic research? The purpose has ultimately been realised. So if someone wants a couple of my toes or wants to put my skull on their bong room shelf, honestly, it's not that deep to me. The point is, I've made the decision for my body to be used for research. I've contacted the specific organisation I want to go to, and I've got my membership card in my wallet. It's a membership to what I see as a very exclusive club. And that's what's important to remember when it comes to cases like the ones we've discussed today. It was my choice, and it was not a choice I made lightly. The deceased people we've talked about today made no such request. They were laid to rest, and there they should stay, unless they need to be exhumed for forensic analysis, such as in the Jolly Joseph poisoning case. And also, it's not unheard of for cemeteries to be levelled in the name of progress and construction, which is a whole other video as well. Queen Victoria Market in Melbourne, for example, is on top of about 10,000 bodies from colonial times, I think. So until next time, viewers, when a dead person needs to be claimed by their family, it's not that hard to find their next of kin in their phone or wallet. Just find a text that says, "Mum." As the kids say, it's not rocket surgery. And if a dead person is laid to rest, don't dig them up. It's gross and weird. And people won't invite you to their birthday parties. So until next time, everybody, I will see you at sundown.